Well, folks, batteries, voltages, and charging them. Okay, here's an alternator. This one here is 24-volt alternator, but it doesn't really matter. There's different types of batteries. This one here is just your typical lead acid type battery, where you can actually remove the caps and look down in each cell. This one here is the spiral technology, so basically it's like an AGM. Now they both are the same voltage, but both of them require different charging rates. And the reason for that is because this one here is a lead acid type, and this one here is not. This one here is basically an AGM, so it's a glass mat type. So there's no liquids within inside this one. So I want to talk about charging. And alternators kind of have something to do with it, and off-grid has something to do with it. So it's going to be probably a little bit of a conversation here, and me gabbing away. But here we go. Okay, so your standard typical lead acid battery, the flooded type, where you can remove the caps. This is just your standard lead acid battery, flooded type. And this one here is the AGM type, which is glass mat, which there's no liquids inside it. Now the charging of such batteries, the high-end voltage definitely makes a difference. So for an example, for your AGM type batteries, I believe the high-end voltage is about 14 volts, 0.4. That's the maximum. If they start going any higher than that, what ends up happening is that the cells, being that there's no liquid inside, end up drying out. And then one of your cells go bad, or two of your cells go bad, and then before you know it, your battery's bad. This one here is 15.5 volts. That's at a high end. But for the most part, it's going to be relatively the same, 14.4. But this one can tolerate much higher voltage due to the reason that it's flooded. And you're not going to dry any cells out. Now, mind you, being that this one here is not a maintenance-free type, these caps every now and then have to be removed and look down into the cells and add the distilled water as needed, because the water itself will evaporate out during the charge process. So now I wanted to bring to your attention the alternators that most vehicles have in them. And even if you're using an alternator to charge up your batteries for off-grid living, get yourself an alternator that has an adjustable voltage regulator. And what I mean by that is that you can control the high-end voltage. This one here is 24 volts. And I removed the back just to show everybody that not all alternators now, mind you, have adjustable voltage regulators, but you can adapt an adjustable voltage regulator to any alternator. So this one here does have an adjustable voltage regulator. There's the voltage regulator here, and here, this little blue piece with that white center, this is the adjusting point. So a little flathead screwdriver would go in down there, and it would go counterclockwise or clockwise to reduce the amount of volts that this alternator is going to reach at a high end before it actually cuts off. So depending on what type of battery you're going to have, you're definitely going to want to adjust the alternator to go with the recommended battery, whatever that may be. So for an example, your standard typical alternator it's already pre-adjusted and set up, and then a person's going to throw a battery in their vehicle, they may not coincide with each other. The battery may not like the voltage that the alternator is actually producing. It may need to be adjusted in order to get good life from your battery. If you don't make those two coincide with each other, you're going to have short-lived something. And more than likely, it's going to be a short-lived battery. So you want to make sure that your alternator is producing the right amount of voltage for depending on what type of battery you have. There's the lead acid type and then the AGM type, and there's also other types. And all these types of batteries require different voltages. And there's reasons for that. Without getting into them reasons, there's reasons for that. If the batteries are not getting the right amount of volts, the battery's not going to maintain itself like it's supposed to. So keep in mind, for charging batteries, whichever battery you have, you have to find out, you need to know what the high-end voltage is. So now keep in mind this. You're driving down a road in your vehicle, whatever vehicle that may be, and your battery's underneath the hood or wherever the battery is, and your alternator is what's keeping it charged. So you're driving down a road and it takes 6 hours to get where you're going. Well, that alternator is maintaining roughly 14.5 volts, could be 15 volts, all depending on how the alternator is set up. So keep that in mind when charging a battery. Now, mind you, that's not a high amp. It's holding at a high voltage at a very low amp. So that battery will be charged. Now, the 6-hour effect doesn't deteriorate or disgrade the battery. What it does is it gives that battery a soak-in charge. And what I mean by soak-in charge is that the charge has penetrated itself completely through the plates. So the longevity of that trip is what done that to the battery. When you're just starting up your vehicle and you're traveling a mile or two and it only takes 5 or 10 minutes, it's not having the opportunity to give a soak charge. That's a real deep charge. It's just giving it a surface charge. But them long trips, some trips take 40 hours. Imagine, here a battery is being held at 15 volts or 14.5 volts, whatever the alternator is set at. That battery is maintaining them volts being held for that 40-hour trip or 50-hour trip or 30-hour trip, however long that trip may be. And the battery doesn't go bad. The battery actually likes that. Now, mind you, it's not a high amp. Alternators reduce their amperage, but keep their volts at the high end where they're set up to be at. So when you're charging a battery at home, for whatever purpose that may be, keep that in mind. Holding this battery at a high voltage, at a low amperage, is very important for a deep charge. If you just give it a 3-hour charge, so let's say I can simplify this a little bit. So you have a battery charger and you're charging the battery up and the battery reaches 14.8. Battery charger says, oh, time to shut off. It shuts off. That just brought the volts to an elevation to 14.8, and then the battery charger says, oh, charged, shuts off. Well, that didn't really give it a deep charge. You want to find a charger that can actually hold that battery at that 14.8 until basically it's producing 0 amps or accepting 0 amps, but yet holding at that high-end voltage. Now you know you have a deep charged battery. And you don't want to do it just for 5 minutes. Like I say, in a vehicle, when a vehicle's taking a trip, some of these trips can be extremely long. 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours. And the battery is going through that whole trip being held at that high voltage at 0 amps. So charging a battery at home, for whatever reason that may be, whether you're living off the grid and you run your house and your different things from the battery bank, keep that in mind for your battery banks. That extreme long period of holding at that high-end voltage, whatever the recommended for the battery it is, the holding point is where your deep charge is going to come in. Just to bring the battery to its high-end voltage and then turn it off, that didn't give it a saturation charge. That did not give it a deep charge. That just gave it a surface charge. And what I mean by surface charge, it just covered all the plates with that high-end voltage. It didn't actually have time to saturate itself within the plates. Well, I hope this video made sense, folks. I hope I explained it in the simplest way I could. Anyhow, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you have not. And thank you very much for those that have subscribed.